بضيوفنا الكرام من مؤسسات المجتمع المدني ومن الناشطين في مجال حقوق الإنسان. هذا المجال اللي ما في شك انه متعب في بلادنا بسبب عدم تطبيق الاتفاقيات والمعاهدات الدولية. موضوع المؤتمر وعنوانه حان الوقت لوقف محاكمات حرية التعبير في الكويت. بلا شك سادة أن الاتفاقيات كثيرة اللي نصت على حرية الرأي والتعبير والتزمت فيها أغلب الدول، ومنها دولة الكويت حسب ما نصت عليه المادة 70 من الدستور الكويتي أن أي اتفاقيات ومعاهدات دولية تبرم وتمر على القنوات الطبيعية وتختم في توقيع صاحب السمو أمير البلاد تكون ملزمة ويطبق عليها القانون. ولكن لاحظنا في الفترة الأخيرة بعد ما توسع هذا الأمر قضايا كثيرة لم تطبق، من ضمنها حريات الرأي والتعبير، وأيضا القضايا المتعلقة بقوانين المرأة واتفاقية سيداو. القضية الأولى في الكويت اللي هي قضية البدون. فإحنا من حرصنا ودورنا كأفراد مجتمع مدني يجب أن ننبه الحكومة ونحذرها لهذه الأمور حتى لا تفرض عليها توصيات مثل باقي الدول اللي قريبة من مجتمعنا. خير دليل يعني مملكة البحرين فرضت عليها توصيات من قبل الأمم المتحدة بسبب مخالفتها لهذه الاتفاقيات والمعاهدات، طبقت منها 70%، ولكن إلى الآن احنا نطمح ونسعى لتطبيق هذه المعاهدات لتنمية المجتمع وعدم إحراجه أمام المجتمع الدولي. كذلك ما ننسى أن نرحب بضيوفنا الكرام الوفد هيومن رايتس ووتش، الأستاذ نديم خوري، نائب التنفيذي الأستاذة بلقيس ولي، المشرفة العامة عن ملف الكويت، أيضا ما خلف الكواليس الأستاذة لما صوفي والأستاذة مريم القطامي، نرحب فيها بلدهم الثاني. وأترككم مع كلمة الأستاذ نديم، تفضل.
صباح الخير جميعا. أول شيء شكر للجمعية الكويتية لحقوق الإنسان والأستاذ محمد على استضافتنا اليوم، وشكرا لحضوركم لإطلاق التقرير السنوي عن وضع حقوق الإنسان في العالم من قبل منظمة هيومن رايتس واتش. هذا التقرير بغطي تطورات حقوق الإنسان أبرزها وأهمها بأكثر من 90 بلد تعمل فيهم المنظمة، ونحن اليوم بصدد إطلاق الفصل المتعلق بدولة الكويت. كلمة بسيطة عن منظمة هيومن رايتس واتش. هي منظمة غير حكومية، يعني جمعية تعمل بأكثر من 90 بلد، لا لها أي صلة بأي دولة، لا تقبل أي دعم مادي من أي حكومة ما، وبتعمل على رصد ونشر التقارير عن انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان والضغط على احترام هكذا حقوق، إن كان عبر التركيز على التزامات الدول بالمعاهدة الدولية أو عبر نشر المعلومات عن هكذا انتهاكات. أبرز القضايا الحقوقية يلي ركزنا عليها بالعام الماضي في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا يعني بشكل مختصر 3 مواضيع أساسية. أول موضوع الانتهاكات الجسيمة لحقوق الإنسان والقانون الإنساني الدولي في سوريا، في النزاع المسلح بسوريا. كنا قد وثقنا جرائم حرب وجرائم ضد الإنسانية، إن كان عبر القصف العشوائي وبعض الأحيان المتعمد ضد المدنيين من الجو، إن كان القصف العشوائي على المناطق الآهلة بالسكان، إن كان عبر ما رصدناه بالأشهر الماضية على سياسة تجويع للمدنيين في مناطق محاصرة، إن كان على سياسة التعذيب يلي بأحيان عديدة أدت إلى وفاة المعتقلين في السجون السورية. وآخر تقرير لنا كان من حوالي أسبوع، كان توثيق عبر صور أقمار اصطناعية وشهادات عن تدمير لأحياء بكاملها بعد ما كان تم السيطرة عليها من السلطات. يعني ليس تدمير في ساعة المعركة، ولكن تدمير عبر البلدوزرز والمتفجرات لأحياء اعتبرها النظام أنها كانت تأوي أو تساند المعارضة أو الثوار في سوريا. وكذلك وثقنا انتهاكات ببعض الأحيان جسيمة قامت بها بعض المجموعات المسلحة التابعة للمعارضة، منها أيضا قصف عشوائي على مناطق آهلة بالسكان، اعتقالات وللأسف تعذيب لعدد كبير من الحالات أدت إلى وفيات، وأيضا إعدامات خارج نطاق القانون. وأحد التقارير يعني بما نحن بالكويت نتكلم عنه، في بعض المجموعات اللي وثقنا أنها قامت بانتهاكات جسيمة عبر الباحث بين أنه بعض الدعم المادي أتى يعني من أفراد عايشين بمنطقة الخليج، وبعض منهم كانوا عايشين في الكويت، فهي كانت مناسبة بما نحن بالكويت اليوم نحكي عن هذا الموضوع. النقطة الثانية يلي يعني إذا بنحكي عن وضع حقوق الإنسان في المنطقة العربية، تراجع عام وواضح ومقلق لوضع حقوق الإنسان في عدد مهم من البلدان العربية التي هي دخلت يعني في مخاض الانتفاضات العربية منذ 3 سنوات حتى اليوم. إن ننظر إلى ما يحصل في مصر اليوم، إن كان من جهة قمع واعتقالات بحق أشخاص في الإخوان المسلمين، ولكن أيضا صحفيين ونشطاء مدنيين ونشطاء حتى لعبوا دور أساسي في ثورة يناير، إن كان بموضوع الاستعمال المفرط والغير قانوني للقوة وبعض الأحيان القوة المميتة ضد متظاهرين كما حصل في ميدان الرابعة، ولكن أيضا في حالات أخرى كثيرة، إن كان على مستوى الإفلات من العقاب للمسؤولين عن بالشرطة وقوى الأمن الداخلي في ال3 سنوات الماضية. كما رصدنا يعني تراجع لحقوق الإنسان في ليبيا، خاصة عبر ممارسات الميليشيات المسلحة في البلد، كما في البحرين، واستمرار اعتقال وقمع الحريات خاصة بما يختص بالنشطاء إن كان بالمجتمع المدني أو النشطاء السياسيين السلميين. وأيضا في اليمن يعني عدة مواضيع، ومنها بعد 3 سنوات الإفلات من العقاب الجماعي للأشخاص المسؤولين عن انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان. النقطة الثالثة يعني إذا ننظر على الوضع حقوق الإنسان في العالم العربي، تراجع لحرية التعبير وحرية التجمع في عدد من بلدان الخليج ومنها الكويت، إن كان عبر اعتقال ومحاكمة المغردين والمدونين يعني مستعملي تويتر، أو إن كان عبر منع التجمعات. وزميلتي بلقيس تتكلم يعني في تفاصيل أكبر عن الوضع في الكويت. التقرير ليس يعني لا يرتكز فقط أو لا يسلط الضوء فقط على انتهاكات في العالم العربي، كما قلت لكم يتناول أكثر من 90 بلد ومنها أكيد الولايات المتحدة. المواضيع الأساسية التي ركزنا عليها في العام الماضي في الولايات المتحدة هي موضوع التنصت، خاصة بعض المعلومات المهمة والخطيرة التي صدرت في الإعلام من سنودن والمعلومات التي خرجت. النقطة الثانية هو موضوع يعني المعتقلين في غوانتانامو، اللي هو الآن بالرغم من عديد من الوعود وبعد سنوات عديدة حتى اليوم لم يكفل هذا مركز الاعتقال الغير قانوني، ولم يحال عدد كبير من المعتقلين إلى محاكمات عادلة. ونحن نعتبر أن ما يسمى بالميليتري كوميشن، يعني المحاكم العسكرية التي شكلتها الولايات المتحدة لمحاكمة عدد من هؤلاء المعتقلين لا تصل إلى المعايير الدولية لحفظ يعني لأدنى المعايير الدولية للمحاكمات العادلة. والنقطة الثالثة هي استعمال الدرونز أو الطائرات من دون طيار، ويعني كيفية السماح لهكذا ضربات من هكذا طائرات، خاصة فيما يحصل في اليمن والباكستان وبلدان أخرى. الآن سأنقل الكلمة إلى زميلتي بلقيس، ولكن يعني ككلمة الختام، نحن يعني دائما كان الكويت يلعب دورا رائدا في الحريات وحقوق المرأة، ونحن ننظر إلى الكويت اللي يلعب هكذا دور. يعني الانتقاد اليوم من هذا الباب، نحن هنالك انتهاكات تحصل في الكويت، ونحن أيضا لدينا آمال أن الكويت سيستطيع أن يعني أن يكون المجتمع المدني الكويتي شريكا حقيقيا في تسليط الضوء على هكذا انتهاكات، ولكي يلعب الكويت الدور الرائد في المستقبل، ليكون يعني ساحة حقيقية لحرية التعبير، خاصة في عالم عربي وفي عالم في الخليج، حيث نرى أن هنالك تشديد أكثر وأكثر على هكذا حريات. والآن الكلمة لزميلتي بلقيس.
آسفة بس راح أكون أحكي بالإنجليزي أسهل لي، وإذا في واحد بده الترجمة في مترجم للعربي. شكرا. So first of all, like my colleagues, I want to thank everyone for coming today and showing an interest in not only Human Rights Watch's work, but in general, sort of the human rights situation in Kuwait. We very much appreciate this opportunity to speak directly to you and to the media about our work on human rights in Kuwait, and we welcome the openness of the government in allowing us to come travel to Kuwait and do this work. Today we'll be focusing within Kuwait on 4 issues. We're not saying that these are the only human rights issues in the country, but we do feel these are the most important that the government needs to address immediately and can address immediately. And we'll be not only speaking about the issues as we see them, but by giving specific recommendations on what the government can do to resolve these human rights violations. The first issue I'll be talking about is in response to a comment that was made by your Speaker of the National Assembly, Mazouk Ali الغانم. In December, he traveled to Brussels and he made a statement. He said that in Kuwait we have no prisoners of conscience, and we would like to address this claim first. We have witnessed an increase in cases that violate freedom of expression. We have spoken to local organizations that have tracked the amount of cases, and they say that between 1962 and 2006, there were only ever 8 cases where people were prosecuted for insulting the emir. And now when you look at the recent years, between 2012 and 2013, we see at least, according to these organizations that are tracking it, at least 200 individuals that have been given criminal charges for insulting the emir. And this does not include individuals who are being held to account for insulting other government officials within Kuwait and heads of other states and religions. They estimate that these cases amount to more than 250 if you take all the categories of laws that are being used to suppress freedom of expression. As my colleague just said, it is worth noting that Kuwait was considered exceptional in the region, specifically with regards to freedom of expression, and it upsets us greatly to see this regression and to see that Kuwait seems to be lowering itself to the standards of its neighbors. What we're worried about is not only the increase in cases, which represent a change in Kuwait's treatment of free speech, but also an increasing demand from the prosecution to give the maximum sentence, and judges' willingness to comply and give these individuals the maximum sentence. We also see some individuals in these freedom of expression cases being treated as dangerous criminals, being held without bail, their heads being shaved and cuffed, and kept in the cage in the courtroom. We even have heard allegations that some of these individuals while in prison are banned from receiving university books and other materials. Those who have been prosecuted and put in jail assert that their cases are political. We welcomed in July, at the end of Ramadan, the decision of Emir al-Sabah to pardon those being held in jail for insulting him. However, since then, we've seen a continuation of cases, which clearly means that the pardon didn't represent a change in the prosecution's desire to hold individuals accountable for expressing free speech. Most recently, we had the case of Abdullah Fayrouz, who was given 5 years, the maximum sentence, for insulting the Emir, and then he was given an order of forced exile following his 5 years in prison. Of course, there can be restrictions on freedom of expression, but given that it is such a fundamental right, the circumstances in which a government can limit free speech are extremely narrow, and this is for good reason. These obligations to respect and uphold free speech come from the fact that Kuwait has ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as other human rights instruments. You can only be held criminally liable for speech that amounts to incitement to violence. The Human Rights Committee that interprets and is the authoritative interpreter of the covenant has said that a government has to be very specific if it is contending that the speech constitutes a threat. It has to establish a direct and immediate connection between the expression and the threat. They give the example of the term coup. A coup could be a call for something violent, or it could simply be a call for a change of government. The prosecution would have to demonstrate that the call for a coup was actually a call for a violent act that may occur. International law especially protects speech that is critical of the government and is advocating a change of government. Kuwait's crimes of offending the Emir, of offending other heads of states and government officials within Kuwait, these are basically defamation charges. And here the UN Human Rights Committee is extremely clear in saying categorically that imprisonment can never be an appropriate penalty for a defamation charge, because it will always be disproportionate. Furthermore, the committee has said that defamation or insult laws should never protect the head of state from criticism. This is because the individual has chosen to put themselves in a position of higher scrutiny, and as they say, should develop a thicker skin and be open to such criticism. In 2011, when the Human Rights Committee reviewed Kuwait, they specifically made the call for Kuwait to decriminalize defamation because this violates the covenant itself. On the crime of insulting religion, the Human Rights Committee has also made commentary and said there are limited circumstances in which a country can limit hate speech, and if it does not amount to incitement to violence, one can only limit this speech in which there's a broad social or historical pattern of incitement, but this restriction must be proportional to its aim and the penalty must be proportionate. What we call on to the Kuwaiti government is to amend all of the laws that are being used right now to abuse expression free speech, and while waiting for a change in the laws, we call on the prosecution and judicial authorities, when considering these cases, to apply the stringent requirements of international law needed to interpret whether the speech crosses a line and can be reined in or not. One other issue related to this is the treatment of human rights defenders. We are extremely concerned by reports from human rights defenders who are trying to monitor different events, including protests, that they're being harassed and they are being threatened by state forces, including threats that they may lose their job and that they may suffer travel bans. This represents a very serious violation. The second topic, which was touched on earlier, is the topic of the bidun. This is a topic that Human Rights Watch has covered in the country for many years. According to official statistics, there are at least 106,000 bidun in the country. And what we've seen in the last few years is that as Kuwaitis have taken to the streets to protest for their rights, bidun have also gone to the streets and protested their rights. Organizations monitoring prosecutions say that over 225 bidun and over 400 Kuwaitis have been charged in the last 2 years for coming out and protesting. Kuwaiti law prohibits non-Kuwaitis from protesting, but this represents a violation of international law. Under international law, it is very clear that all have the right to peaceful assembly. This is one of the most fundamental rights and cannot be derogated, and can only be restricted in specific circumstances, including when there's a public emergency which threatens the life of the nation, and where the state makes a formal proclamation that there is a state of emergency. We therefore call on the government to amend the laws that prevent non-Kuwaitis from peaceful assembly, and in the meantime to stop all prosecutions against Bidoun and other non-Kuwaitis who are coming out and protesting. One big disappointment is that in March 2013, your parliament passed a law that 4,000 foreigners could be given citizenship within this past year. We were hopeful that the Bidoun community would benefit from this decision. However, as of November, no Bidoun had been naturalized. This was according to the Bidoun committee who we met with earlier. And unfortunately, we hear that within the last month in December, we do not hear any reports that Bidoun benefited from this law. We also spoke with the Bidoun committee in 2011, and they told us there was a list of 35,000 Bidoun with legitimate citizenship claims. We wonder why these 35,000 could not have been addressed, or at least 4,000 of them within the last year, given the law. We call on the government to give citizenship to all children who are born to Bidoun fathers and therefore will inherently become stateless, as well as those with long-term and strong nationality claims, and to give legal residency to all others pending the review of their cases. The citizenship process must be transparent, with a right to judicial review of decisions. And what we are concerned about is that in 2010, the government gave the committee 5 years to resolve all Bidoun citizenship claims. Given that we are now in 2014, we're concerned that the government and the committee will not meet this deadline. In March 2011, the government granted the Bidoun a different range of new benefits and services, which we took to be a positive step. However, in the last year, we've met with Bidoun who complain that there are many administrative hurdles that are preventing them from accessing these benefits, including differing standards in healthcare provided to them and access to certain jobs, among other examples. Even more worrying is that many Bidoun have complained that their review cards, or their, as they call them, green cards, are being renewed for only 3 months. If only renewed for 3 months, this prevents them from getting a driver's license. This prevents them from registering for many services. We also hear, which is even more disturbing, is that the renewal of these cards, and the renewal only for 3 months, is a specific punishment to be used against the Bidoun who are turning out in the streets and protesting. We call on the government to immediately cease punishing Bidoun who turn out and protest, and commence renewing cards for the full period of 2 years in order to allow them access to all the services that they were given with the decision in 2011. I would like to now turn to the issue of domestic workers. This is an issue we work on not only in Kuwait, but across the Khalij, and beyond that in the sending states. As you all know, Kuwait's labor law of 2010 explicitly leaves domestic workers out. And all we have in Kuwait is a standard domestic workers contract. At the GCC level, there was an initiative in the last year to draft a standard contract that would be applied in all GCC states. This was discussed by GCC representatives in October of last year. This draft standard contract does not meet the standards that are laid out in international law, specifically in the International Labor Organization's new Convention on Domestic Workers' Rights. Not only that, it is clear to us, as well as to domestic workers themselves who we have interviewed, that nothing short of a law will adequately protect them. And a draft standard contract, even if passed, will not adequately address the problem. We call on the government to immediately ratify the ILO Convention on Domestic Workers' Rights of 2011 and to pass a law, whether it's to include domestic workers under the labor law or a separate legal instrument that covers the rights of domestic workers. Unfortunately, the bigger issue, and one that we call on the government to modify whenever we raise this issue, is the kafil system itself. the inherent nature of the kafil system means that domestic workers will always remain more vulnerable than their employers. Ultimately, we see the need to overhaul the kafil system if one wants to actually equalize the relationship between the worker and the employer and give the domestic worker his or her full rights under the law. Finally, a very sad development last year which we witnessed was the resumption of the death penalty in Kuwait. We were very happy to see Kuwait had a de facto moratorium in place. And last year, suddenly, 5 prisoners were executed. It is extremely disappointing to see that in a world where more and more countries are abolishing the practice. In 2007, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution that was a landmark in calling for an end to the death penalty, and every year more and more countries sign up to the resolution. Therefore, we call on the government to stop all executions and to put back in place the de facto moratorium pending a change in the law that prevents the application of the death penalty. Those are the issues we wanted to focus on today. We're happy to take questions on not only those issues, but any other human rights issues that we and our colleagues from the Kuwait Human Rights Society have worked on. Thank you very much.
في مايك؟
Yeah.
أعتقد في فوق.